Good evening, everybody. We are now recording. Welcome, Madeline Murphy Rabb. How are you?
Just great. Happy to be with you guys.
Wonderful. You've been, do you call yourself an art advisor or an art consultant?
Both. Usually advisor.
Do you differentiate?
Not really. They're pretty much one and the same.
And let's go backwards. Where were you raised? Did you think you were an artist? Are you an artist? How did you art become part of your life? How did you get from childhood to here?
Well, I grew up in Baltimore, and I grew up in a household where I was surrounded by original art. My great aunt was a renowned portrait painter. So my mother, who was her niece, had many of her paintings in the house. And everybody in my family made things, so being an artist wasn't something extraordinary. It was what we all did.
Okay.
And so I studied art in high school. I was an art major. And then I went to, but when I graduated from from high school and wanted to go to art school, my father said, "Are you crazy? How are you going to make a living?" My father was an attorney. My mother was a writer. And so he discouraged me. And instead, I went to the University of Maryland and studied business and public administration, which almost killed me.
Yep.
And after 2 years there, my mother, and almost flunking out, my mother said, "You're an artist. You belong in art school." So I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. So I studied painting and drawing. Then after I got married, about when my youngest was 2 and my next one was about ready for kindergarten, I started at the Institute of Design, where I studied printmaking.
Where is that?
Illinois Institute of Technology.
Okay, so here in Chicago, you moved from Baltimore to Chicago at some point.
That's correct. So okay. I've been in Chicago since 1966.
Cool. Okay. And then what?
So then I got this wonderful master's in science in printmaking, and decided that I needed to have a studio. So I had a studio at 1006 South Michigan up until about 1982, and I did printmaking and painting and drawing, and I had. I really did not like the isolation, however. And I got involved with Harold Washington's campaign when he was running for mayor of Chicago, and was part of Artists for Washington, and got involved in that campaign. And a few years later, after he was elected, I got a phone call asking me if I'd like to be the director of fine arts for the city of Chicago.
Fabulous.
So I did that for about 7.5 years. It predated the Department of Cultural Affairs. And then within the first year of my taking the position, the Department of Cultural Affairs was created. Fred Fine was the first commissioner. So in that capacity, I was dealing with a staff of 32, and I was responsible for all of the public programs, art exhibits, the public art program, grants, etc. And
did you coexist with the Department of Cultural Affairs when it was created?
It was the Office of Fine Arts was subsumed, so it became the Office of Fine Arts, the Mayor's Office of Special Events, and the Film Office.
How long was Harold Washington mayor? Was it 7 years? Or, did you serve at his pleasure, and when he died, your position went away, or did you keep the position?
I kept my position. I served all the way through Daley. They all kept me on.
And then
he died early in his second term. Right.
Does that position exist anymore?
Well, it became a deputy commissioner position. Everything changed.
Okay.
But many of the programs that I instituted are still in existence. The one of which I'm most proud is the CAPE program. It was the first program that would fund individual artists.
Cool.
And it allowed artists to get a small amount of money with not a whole lot of red tape to do slides at that time or get technical assistance or any number of things. So it's been very helpful to artists over the years.
That's cool. Did you enjoy politics?
I actually did. I come from a very political family, so I was well prepared. I was fearless.
That's interesting.
But it was tedious. It was tedious. But what I did learn was that in order to get the attention and to get funding for the arts, I had to work closely with the aldermen. Prior administrators, prior people holding my position sort of saw them as a nuisance. I embraced them because they were the ones that passed the budgets. They were the ones who I could convince to give more money because I was putting art in their communities, you know.
What did that do to your art making career?
Killed it. I couldn't paint or draw or do any of that. I was living vicariously. I didn't have the energy. I don't know how artists can work full time and make art. I take my hat off to them.
I think it's really difficult, and I think especially if you're involved in a position that is emotionally and intellectually taxing, you know, and you know, where you're dealing with other people's aesthetics, etc. It's really hard to find or, you know, to remain true to your own aesthetic.
It is, but I think what kept me excited was that being an artist and understanding the challenges that artists were facing made me a very strong advocate and made me able to do some things on their behalf.
Yeah, I'm certain that's true. That's important. Okay, so then what happened after you left politics?
I got very disenchanted after Daley was appointed, and I decided that I'd had enough. Mm-hmm. So I resigned, and I started my own advisory business.
Wait, do you feel like Daley wasn't particularly appreciative or supportive?
Well, Lois Weisberg was the new commissioner, and Lois was really a person who was about circuses and big events and, you know, the folderol, you know, the, yep. And I was more concerned with the substance and the essence of art making and supporting artists, and, you know, and so we had a total different philosophy.
So it wasn't Daley per se, it was Lois Weisberg with whom philosophical. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and I liked her, but I just knew I couldn't work with her because at one point we had been peers. When the Office of Special Events was under Harold Washington, she was the director of special events then. Then she became a commissioner, and it just was not a good marriage.
Fair enough. Okay. So what happened? What did you do?
So because I had gotten a lot of national recognition for the work I was doing, particularly around the issue of diversity in the arts, I did a lot of speaking, keynote addresses, and workshops and panels around helping organizations build diverse audiences, et cetera, et cetera. But I found it tedious, and I found it unsatisfying. And I decided I wanted to be in charge of something that I controlled, that I didn't have a board, I didn't have anybody, I didn't have to write any reports.
Yep.
And I was recommended to do the art for a new high-rise in Chicago, Cityfront Place. And it had just broken ground, and they asked me if I could find a piece of art for the trailer where they were beginning to rent. Okay. And then they said, well, can you do 10 stories of artwork, works on paper? So I'm like, dear God, where am I going to find all this art? So I started going around to galleries and calling on workshops out of the city. Based on my relationships, people sent me a lot of works on paper. And I was able to provide the client with the artwork. Then they said, can you do 39 stories? Then they said, can you do 3 lobbies? And I was off and running, a one-man show.
Yep.
So that's how I started in 1992.
Okay. And this is pretty much, how has that evolved? How has it changed between now and then? You know, your business, how has it evolved?
Well, I decided that I went on to do county hospital.
Okay.
I did all of the art for the county hospital called Stroger. I did a number of banks. I consulted with art curators in businesses who needed specifically work by artists of color, because I became the go-to person for that and still am. And then I decided I didn't like these big committees, and I started getting business from small individually owned businesses like Ariel Capital, John Rogers, and companies on the East Coast, companies on the West Coast, wealthy families, etc., where I was able to have a really close personal relationship with either the owners or the families that I worked with. So, and I went to you. I must tell all of these participants that you were one of my go-to guys when I was looking for quality art, and you were a joy to work with.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I've been a joy.
Oh, you didn't know you were a joy. Okay, maybe that's...
I knew we worked together and had fun. I just didn't know I was a joy. So it's different. I mean, with an individual, you're growing a relationship. But predominantly, your relationships are with, correct me if I'm wrong, with the people who are buying the art more than the people who are making the art?
Exactly. My client is the client, the business owner, the future collector, the couple, whatever. Yeah.
But you're involved in educating. I mean, with the businesses, when they said, can you do 3 lobbies, you're not educating the client very much.
No.
But when you're working with John Rogers, I mean, you're exposing him to new art and finding out what his affinities are. So there's a balance, there's a dialogue.
Absolutely. And a big part of my engagement is an educational part, because many of the people that I worked with did not have a great deal of exposure to art, and they needed guidance and they needed to do some homework. I took them to shows, I got them to subscribe to publications and, go to museums, etc. But people get very impatient once they start. They want to buy,
That's
and
interesting.
I have to slow them down because I want a cohesive collection. I want them to love what they have, and I want them to put a little effort into it.
Let's flip the table a little bit. Where do you find the art that these people choose to buy?
Over the years, I've developed relationships with dealers and galleries and auction houses and individual artists. And so I go to them. And then I also get referrals from other artists, from collectors. I just have a huge resources, but it's been developed over, 25, 30 years, both as a practicing artist, some of those relationships, and through my years with the Department of Cultural Affairs, and then with personal relationships. But it's not easy. People think, oh, you were the director of fine arts and you blah, blah, blah. You got to work your butt off to get projects. They just don't fall in your lap, as you well know.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Go to a lot of cocktail parties.
Yeah.
I've hosted soirees in my home for future collectors who then tell me about businesses that they're working for that are looking for art. I do it with my website. I do it just hustling. You don't do it sitting in a chair. You have to be seen and out there.
Is it different working with collectors out of town on the East and the West Coast, et cetera, than it is with people who are local? Or is it essentially the same thing? No,
it's difficult because it's important for me to experience the space. I have to feel it. I have to see the light. I have to meet the client. So there's travel involved. And then there's the transport of artwork back and forth. Fortunately, when I first started, you'd have to schlep everything. But now with JPEGs, high quality JPEGs, you can send a lot of things over the internet. Do
you find that most of the collectors with whom you're dealing are buying at a consistent price point, like it's always 10 to 15,000, or 3 to 5,000, or 70 to 100,000, or are they buying at different points?
Well, generally my clientele is pretty wealthy, so they're buying at higher ends. But the collection can have, and generally the kind of art I'm looking for is by established artists with reputations who are doing consistent work, who have some value in the marketplace, but also because the client has fallen in love with the work. So it could be a simple drawing or a print, but primarily I'm dealing with unique pieces.
Do they buy, I mean, so how many of these people are collecting and how many of them are decorating?
You know, I think I've been very fortunate to have collectors, to have nurtured a number of serious collectors. Periodically, I'll have a client who has a sofa and who has something that they need a particular size for. Some of it is decorating, frankly, but for the ones with whom I've had these long relationships building collections, it's about a really integrated collection.
So are you frequently calling up somebody and saying, hey, I came across this piece that relates to Carol Walker, that the Carol Walker you have, perhaps, and this would be a really good counterpoint, and I'm sending you the image, would you take a look at it? Things like that?
Yeah, you stay in touch. But you know, the interesting thing, I think in the old days, when people had art advisors, they may have held on to them for a longer period of time. Now with the internet, you wonderful artists with your wonderful websites, the abundance of art fairs. Once people get the bug and they begin to think, well, you know, I can do this, I don't need any advice. They begin to do things independently, which is fine. You know, I mean, you're hoping that people acquire a collection and that you've built a foundation to educate them and to start them on their way. But I have seen people buy art because it's a name piece that they think they should have in the collection, as opposed to a piece that they love or that I think will stand the test of time.
Don't you feel, I mean, I'm supposing that there are collectors who bought stuff, I'm calling it stuff, before they got in touch with you, who, let's say, they learned from their mistakes. Yes,
you hope they do, at least. Yes. And you know, the challenge I have is the best client for me is a virgin. You know, empty walls, no real strong point of view, and some money.
Yep.
And what I often find is people who have already started collecting, who have some things that I have to use a lot of diplomacy about, suggesting that it needs to go under their bed in storage, or, you know, and you don't do that immediately, but they begin to realize it. But other times I have to be very upfront. You know, this just does not fit into the long-range plan.
Are you doing corporate work now at all?
Not very much. Not very much. Mainly individual.
But you know, there are plenty of new artists showing up all the time, some of whom are really interesting. How do you find these folks, or how do they find you?
Well, I find them by looking and going out, and people are always sending me inquiries, and you know, people find me, and I find them. You know, but I'm still very committed, more committed to the established artists, because in the arena of African American art, there are a lot of very well-established artists who've been making work for many, many years, who have not received the recognition they deserve.
True.
Who I respect, and who I think deserve to be in collections, and some of whom are beginning to be represented by galleries and moving on and doing very well. The times have changed a bit.
Want to name names?
Well, for example, do you know MacArthur Binion?
Sure.
Well, I started working with MacArthur early in my career, And in recent years, he has gotten wonderful representation. His prices have just gone off the chart. I was placing Terry James Marshall before he was really well known. Dawood Bey was another, you know. And it's great.
You have portraits of your kids by Dawood, don't you? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
You know, Dawood is one of the most, you know, those of you who haven't listened to the webinar with Dawood, D-A-W-O-U-D, Bey, B-E-Y, it's a fabulous webinar. And Dawood is one of the most intelligent, most generous, most sincere human beings I've ever met. He's really remarkable.
I'm responsible for getting him to come to Chicago. Back in '92, he was Hamza Walker, who was then with the Department of Cultural Affairs in the Public Art Program, had gotten a project to commission him to do a piece of art, a portrait or a figure, you know, for a library, and didn't have sufficient budget. So he reached out to a number of people, including me, and I sat down and I really just fell in love with him immediately, and gave money and was able to get these commissions done. Little did I know that years later I would be putting his work in collections all over the city of Chicago, and also introducing him around to the people at Columbia College, where I was on the board for many years, encouraging them to hire him on their faculty, where he's been for a long time now.
I mean, Dawood was amazing then. He's just continues to grow and get more and more awesome, you know?
And I think he's also getting the kind of recognition that he so dearly deserves.
But are you taking a look at younger African-American artists too, and doing something with, you know, some of these people today?
I am.
Have you found them? They found you? I mean, like, did you work with Rashid Johnson early on, or did we avoid Rashid?
No. I put Rashid in collections. I even collected some of his work. Yeah. Interestingly, MacArthur Binion was Rashid's teacher.
That is interesting. I didn't know that. And I wonder about the circle. I mean, so that MacArthur is now showing with Kavi Gupta Gallery, and I don't know how that came about. Do you?
Yeah, but it's not relevant.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the different ways that artists get on your radar, which is probably what most of the folks we're speaking with want to know about.
Well, usually
we can. I'm sorry. We can. You know. I mean, we can talk in generalities to an extent, because we can extrapolate from how artists have gotten on your radar to how artists get on anybody's radar anyway. You know, but specifics help.
Well, they get on my radar by my seeing them in exhibits, and you know, I developed a coterie of artists by going to graduate school programs at the Maryland Institute of Art, at the Art Institute, you know, where you see a lot of talent in the master's programs at Columbia College. And I'm telling you, once I see somebody and I love their work, I will hunt them down. And so I remember an artist whose work I saw. She was a textile artist. And I would call her and she would be like, nah, I'm busy. I'm blah, 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 blah. I said, okay. And then I'd call her in a year and she would give me and finally she connected with me. But a lot of times artists are distrustful of people like me, because they're like, well, are they going to get me a project? Or, you know, how is this relationship? And they can be a little difficult. And so I think that artists have to be conscious of the fact that when somebody reaches out to them, they need to at least give them the benefit of the doubt, do a little research, ask around, is this person legit? And then, and the thing that I have to say to every artist is that you've got to be ready at the drop of a hat. As an art advisor, there are times when I get a project and I need a bunch of JPEGs. There's no guarantee that you're going to get in the project, but your damn sight better give me the JPEGs, because if I can't use it for this project, I'll remember how cooperative you were on on this first request. And those artists, I'm telling you, who get their information to me lickety split with excellent images, because that's all I have to represent when I'm showing a client. The right size. The price is different because there we will work, because a lot of times artists who aren't represented don't have a clue how much their work is worth, or they may have an overinflated sense of how much their art is worth. And I am very honest and transparent with them about how I will price their work. But the thing is, respond quickly, efficiently. You know, the worst is I have a ton of JPEGs with no names on them, or a CD, no name, no date. And, you know, I download it into my iPhoto and I'm saying, who the hell is this? You know, and so you have to provide detailed size, medium, dates, etc. Whenever you send anything out to anybody.
All right. I think that the artist's name should be part of the JPEG name, so that it would be like Rabb space or hyphen. Then do you want the title of the work? I don't know how much. I don't think we want to put the title, the year, and the measurements and the medium.
That's accompanying the CD.
Yeah, you know. but each JPEG should have the artist's name.
Absolutely.
And the title of the piece,
if possible, and dimension.
I mean, the dimension in the name of the JPEG, you think?
It would help, because that way I can say, oh, I need a huge piece. Now, you know, I'm looking at the photograph and saying, what the hell size is this? Then I'll have to go to a piece of paper and find out.
Well, my experience is frequently the piece of paper on my desk gets lost.
Exactly.
And you know, so that to have it digitally in one place, you know, helps.
You know, what else would be ideal if an artist would, because this is ultimately what I end up doing, is dropping photographs into an Excel sheet, you know, with the image, the artist name, and the description of the work, and the asking price. And that way I can pull out the sheet, you know. The other thing that really is difficult is when an artist says, oh, well, I have a website, go look at my work on the website.
I don't like that either.
It pisses me off. You know why?
Just to be clear.
Well, because I have to, you know, go through all of the stuff, and then half the time the work is out of date, it's not available. And invariably, when I'm showing work to a client, they want the piece that's not available. So I'm interested in what's available.
Yeah, I also think that the artist should reduce the amount of work that you or a gallery has to do to comprehend their aesthetic and comprehend what they're about. And when somebody says, just go to my website and pick whatever you want, I'm having to do the work. And right. I like it when the artist, you know, is picking the work and I can see if they know which are the better pieces too.
Yes.
You know, and most often artists judge their own work fairly well and know what the better pieces are and send that. It's, you know, sometimes you have the comparison. But I think the main point is to not make when you're asking somebody to do something for you, make the amount of work they have to do to be nice to you as little as possible.
Absolutely. And I absolutely respect how difficult it is for an artist who's not represented to deal with the business of art. But let me tell you, having a good art business, is going to get you further. You've got to devote, you know, some hours to the month or the week to organizing your slides so that at a moment's notice, you can send off what's requested of you.
Agreed. And the resume should be kind of up to date.
Yeah, and I don't want every exhibit. I just want bullets. Just keep it simple. Because you know what? I'm not selecting you necessarily based on your resume. I'm selecting you based on your aesthetic.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I want to open this up for questions in a couple of minutes, but somebody asked a question we should talk about for a moment, and that is, how do you get paid? My understanding is that, Quickly.
Anybody who works with me, the first person who gets paid when I get paid is the artist, because doggone it, I respect the needs of artists. So yes, quickly.
I wasn't. The question wasn't how do you pay. The question is how do you get paid.
All right.
All right. So, go ahead.
Well, I am as a consultant. I have a contract. It depends on the project. Sometimes I'm always paid as a consultant by an hourly fee, and it's possible to get a flat fee if I know that the upfront time is a certain amount of time, and then after that is exhausted, then I get a commission on the sale of art, either from the artist or the gallery. So I'm very careful about, I don't mark up art just so I can get a profit. Let's say a gallery will pay me, they'll say, well, you know, I can only pay you 5% of the cost, you know, over the cost of the artwork. Then my client, I should get 20%. So the client pays the difference. But it's all transparent. Don't choke.
What about when you're working with artists? What do you do? I mean, when you're buying, or, well, I have another question, but when you're buying work from artists, do you get a discount and you're sharing retail with the collector, and the collector pays retail, and you're making a commission essentially?
That's right.
In the neighborhood of 20%.
Exactly. Or more sometimes, depending.
Yeah, but probably not over 25 very often.
No.
Right. Okay. Oh, I don't remember what I was going to say. Commissions. What, do you commission artwork sometimes?
Oh, absolutely, I have.
Let's talk about that. How do you structure it? How do you do it? How does it work? How often, at what stages does somebody get paid?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, you know, I haven't done, usually the artist will get a third up front upon the signing of the agreement. And then depending on how long it takes, they can be paid in full upon delivery, or if it's a longer process, they can get another point after the work is approved, and then a final payment upon delivery.
What is done, so English, Paul, how does the client know, how does the client commit? How does the client, what is the client looking at to be able to commit?
Well, they've seen a number of, I have an example. I had a client who loved the work by a particular artist, and they loved a particular piece that was no longer in existence, and they wanted something very similar in size and content. And so the artist did a maquette, well, they did a drawing, a little miniature drawing, and said, this is what it's going to look like. And the client approved, and the artist created it, and the client was happy. I've not had anybody not like what an artist proposed, you know, but that's iffy. And, you know, the situation where they get it and they're like, oh, this isn't what I want, that becomes difficult. I haven't been in that situation, and I'm not sure what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, I've commissioned things for myself where I wasn't happy with the results, and I bought it and said, I don't know that I want to do more commissions.
Yeah, and you know what? I really don't encourage commissions because, you know, people get their hopes up about something and then often are disappointed. And ideally, and I think artists like to sell work that they've created. You know, they don't sort of like to make work to order, you know? But sometimes it's required.
I agree, but I mean also, yeah, but when you're commissioning something, you have an expectation of what you're going to get, and then you get something else. You have to be pretty flexible to embrace the something else.
But let me just say this. I did commission a piece for Ariel a number of years ago, a wall sculpture by a metal artist, and he did an exquisite maquette, a little maquette. And the original art looked just like the maquette. There was no, you know, so the one,
like Richard Hunt.
Well, he was a protege of Richard's.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, I was very pleased with that. So I've had very good luck with commissions.
Interesting.
I can tell you something else that artists have to do.
Okay.
Well, usually I'm very conscious of the costs that artists have to expend on shipping and that kind of thing. So the client pays for the shipping, and sometimes artists have to send something out on approval. And so the arrangement is that the client has to pay both ways. I never want to put the burden on the artist, but I've had situations where artists don't know how to wrap stuff, so I always send them to a professional art handler to wrap the work and insure it, because it's not worth it. It's not worth it for something to arrive broken. And I've had horrible experiences with broken art arriving.
Yeah, that's dreadful.
Tell me, I mean, you talk about a nightmare. Yep.
Let's open this up for questions. Harley, I'm coming to you first. Hold on, I'm scrolling. I'm done scrolling. You're unmuted, Harley. Go ahead.
How are you going, Madeline?
Hi.
You have to excuse Harley. He's in Australia and he thinks it's cold.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty warm. 8 degrees today, Paul. Thanks. I was just wondering if you could go into more detail about how you met these wealthy West Coast families and the businesses that you worked with. Like, did it just start at art exhibitions, or are you finding them through other sort of methods?
Well, through my own social circles, I go to a lot of cocktail parties. I mean, I never go to a cocktail party just for the purpose of going to a cocktail party. I go out with business cards. I go out to engage people, to find out what's going on. And I just get information, and then I get cards, and then I follow up.
Okay. Is that a certain... I've never been invited to a cocktail party in my life. Is that a certain age bracket?
It is. And you know, the age bracket that I'm looking at is clients in their mid 40s to 60s, you know. And
okay.
So, you know, I go where the money is. I don't go to networking events, because that's a waste of time. I go directly to where I think there are people with money.
So why not networking events?
Because everybody's looking for the same thing, and it's like sitting around talking to another artist constantly about how do you find projects. You don't need to talk to the artist. You need to be at openings. You know, you need to sort of follow people around. You need to, you just got to figure out who is my potential client and where do they hang out.
Okay.
You know, I don't know. When I had a gallery, I didn't find that going to benefits was particularly valuable. But, you know, here, Madeline, you know, was working in politics, and there were certain high-powered people she would see in political situations and could create a relationship with John Rogers, for example, who, you know, is a wealthy individual and somewhat political, but not very, but people solicit his support. And she could become friendly with him and then get invited to something and then meet somebody else there. So that I think for you to extrapolate, it's like, you know, going to a gallery and meeting, you know, all you're talking about is meeting one individual at one event that you find interesting and nurturing that relationship and, you know, and growing your community and having that person go, Harley, your work is really nice. Thanks so much. You know, I like looking at it. You know, you don't need to make a sale, but at that point, you then keep informing that person of what's going on. And maybe you get invited to a barbecue, you know, and at the barbecue, maybe you meet one other person, you know, and Madeline has been doing this for over a few hours, you know, so, I mean, you know, we're talking a couple of decades. So it's the same kind of thing. It's a long process. And then you grow and nurture those relationships. But, you know, as I like to point out, it's all about, you know, baby steps and repeating the process and, you know, and growing it so that, You know, I mean, there are people in this course that you have, you know, encountered that have been our experts that you could still and maybe did send an email to saying, thank you so much. If you ever come to Australia, stop by. Here's an image of mine just so you know what I'm up to. You know,
and you know what, Paul? I'll tell you the truth. There have been situations where, you know, sometimes when I'm sitting saying, what the heck am I going to show a client? And, you know, I'm racking my brains. I'm going through all of my iPhotos from years and years and looking at, and then an artist will email me and say, hey, I was thinking about you. I want you to come to my opening. Here's some of my work. And it's like, yes, that's what I need to see, you know? And so you can never underestimate the power of staying in touch with people you've met who've admired your work. Don't underestimate it.
You know, I mean, and for all of you, especially, you know, if your work is a little bit interesting or a little bit challenging, to be able, you know, when you complete a really favorite piece, send it to people. And if that is as often as once every 6 weeks, that's not too often. Sure. You know, I mean, you're not being obnoxious, you're not being obsequious, you're keeping people informed. You know, I mean, the worst thing that can happen is they write you back and go, I love you dearly, I've got enough stuff, don't send me anymore.
Or I know somebody who's looking for something.
Yeah, totally. But there are an awful lot of times where Madeline or I are, like she says, racking our brains to come up with something, and what we come up with is the next email. You know, so that.
Doggone right, it's happened.
Yeah. Daniel, your turn. Hold on. Thank you, Harley. It's a good thing I know how the alphabet works. Daniel, go ahead.
You sort of just addressed this, but I was going to ask how important it is to your work, Madeline, to have artists interact directly with the clients. Like, how often do they want to meet them, and are they interested in them as individuals? Other people have talked about this cult of personality and so on. And
absolutely. Well, you know what? That is something that I want my client to experience. But often, and this is the whole thing around integrity. Mm-hmm. Sometimes artists are so anxious to sell something that they will sometimes take advantage of an introduction that I've made on their behalf, that they will go and try to do business directly with the client when in fact I have opened that door for you. So there is a level of integrity and honesty and respecting the relationship that you have with that art advisor. Because, you know, right. you may slip through and sell a piece, but you'd be amazed. Sometimes it comes back to bite you in the butt, because you go to that collector's house and you see something and you say, you know, and so you want to be on good terms with whomever is representing you at that moment, you know? Mm-hmm. But yes, the question of the client knowing the artist, absolutely. I think it's wonderful and important, and I encourage it, and I create those opportunities. And then once the client has collected something, I keep them apprised. That's why the artist needs to stay in touch, because when something wonderful happens to them, they need to send it to me, and then I can share it with the collectors. Okay, but you know, there's the business of being an artist that's so important.
It's really true. I mean, basically, it's to be professional.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? This art world is so small. You know, if I take advantage of an artist, let's say, which I never have, to the contrary, I have a great reputation among artists. Other artists hear about it, clients hear about it. So you have to operate in the most conscientious and respectful way in this field.
All right, transparently, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Agreed.
And you know, when an art consultant, and I try often to let an artist know that their work isn't going to work in a project, and it's usually a very hard letter for me to make, because I know, particularly when you're working with an artist, they're so anxious, you know. And I try to very quickly let them know if the project isn't going to include their work, but to encourage them to stay in touch, and that, you know, I will keep them apprised of other opportunities if I like the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you too. Theo, go ahead.
Yes. Hi there. I thank you very much. I was wondering, you mentioned the use of good art handlers. Could you give us the names of some credible art handlers that we could use?
Yeah, Terry Dowd is excellent.
Terry Dowd, D-O-W-D, operates out of Chicago and Denver. Let's talk about this for a minute. Madeline, do you have more names? Because I have things I want to say.
Yeah, but I always can never remember names.
You think about it for a minute, and I'll talk about shipping. I think that there are several ways to go about shipping fine art, and it kind of depends on how fragile it is and how big a shipment it is and how much time you have. There are a couple of companies that are driving trucks around the United States in big circles, so that it seems to me like they go from like Phoenix, and that might be Fine Art Shippers that operates out of somewhere in Arizona and somewhere in New Mexico, like Santa Fe. And then they go to like Houston and New Orleans and Atlanta and New York, so that if you want to ship something from Dallas to Phoenix, it might take 3 weeks to get there. But if you want to ship something from Phoenix to Dallas, it might take only 3 days to get there. And these companies typically transport, these are art trucks, so that there are special, kinds of shock absorbers on them and racks inside the trucks, like the racks you might have in your studio. You still want to wrap the artwork in bubble wrap, but you don't need to put it in a crate. They cost more money and you need to calculate it. Or you could crate it and you could ship it by truck. There's a company I used to use a lot that was called Air It There, and I would use their truck service by Air It There, which acronym AIT. There's a couple of few shippers out of New York that are really good. I'm blanking on the name myself. One of them has a 4 in the name. So that, sometimes when I would do a show with Jun Kaneko and who was in Omaha and I was in Chicago, I would buy a contract for a whole trailer, a 53-foot trailer van, and the truck would be solely mine. What I would want to try and do when I would be shipping 1,000-pound ceramics would be to control the whole thing so it never got offloaded. If the artist and his or her people put the art on the truck, and the gallery, in my case, me and my people, would take the art off the truck, it almost always came fine. If they had to offload the stuff somewhere in Chicago and put it on a smaller truck to get it to me, shit would get hurt. Sometimes you're better off packaging the thing yourself and shipping it in a box. And sometimes, as Madeline is talking about, with sending art to a client, where there's a chance the stuff is going to come back, you want to create a box where it's easily reusable, so that the materials can be reused and reapplied to the piece and not made so mysterious or difficult or challenging that the collector on the other end just throws the material in the box and then throws the artwork on top of it and shuts the lid and the hell with you. You don't want that to happen. So those are the kinds of considerations that I think are relevant. If you guys at some point have specific shipping questions, you can ask me about it in the future or now. I see Danielle asking about overseas and Pacific West Coast companies. Shipping stuff overseas is more difficult. And invariably, I used to show Alice Aycock and worked with shipping stuff of hers, metalwork, from Europe to the United States and back and forth. And a lot of times, if it's in the hold of a ship, it gets wet. And if it gets wet, in her case, it rusted. And, salt water rusts a little more quickly. That's a really good way to ruin art. And dealing with insurance on international shipments is a bigger pain in the buttocks. And I think you want to ship it by air, which isn't particularly prohibitive. It's certainly more expensive, so that you need to package things to ship, to be able to do that. Madeline, Atelier 4. Paul, thank you. That is the company I was thinking of.
I can't remember. I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to remember 30,000 artist names.
That's right.
Okay, cool. So that, Theo's asking about who pays for insurance. if this is a good question. If you're shipping art to or from a gallery should have an insurance policy that covers shipping, or they're not sufficiently reputable that you want to be dealing with them. It doesn't hurt.
I can tell you a nightmare about that.
It can, yeah, I betcha. So that you should ask that, if you're shipping to or from a gallery, if the gallery is covering the insurance. And I think for me to have them say yes verbally is sufficient. I don't think you need that in writing, but it wouldn't hurt. When you ship art, when you ship anything, you can buy insurance from the shipper, which sort of scares me because it's sort of like, well, okay, cool. That way we can bounce it. And that bothers me. But you can buy insurance for each individual box or each individual shipment when you are shipping art. Angela listed some companies that she likes. There's a lot of them. I don't know any that I can say are bad that I know off the top of my head. It's also been, for me, 10 years since I've done any of this kind of shipping. Are we done talking about shipping, Madeline? You want to tell a horror story?
One of the things that I've learned is relationships with artists have saved me over and over again. I had a situation where I convinced an artist to sell me a piece. She's now deceased, Elizabeth Catlett. You've heard of Elizabeth Catlett.
Sure.
I've known her. I knew her for years when I was from my family connections. And I sold a client a piece of hers, and she shipped it from Mexico. And so I always tell my collector, open the box in front of the shipper, or immediately. Don't, do this. Well, they didn't open the box. Finally, they opened the box. The sculpture was in 1 billion pieces.
Ah.
I was like, I think I would rather just die. Well, I immediately got on the phone to Mrs. Catlett, and I told her what happened, and she replaced the piece. She did another piece that was even better than the one that was destroyed at no cost to the client. It was a miracle. And I never told my husband at the time what I was going through because it lasted for about 3 or 4 months. And I would call her periodically and say, how's it coming along? How it's coming along? And she'd say, I'm giving it to you. I'll do it when I'm ready. And my client is saying, is she really going to give it to us? Finally she did. Another situation was a piece sent from a dealer who sent it by Federal Express. She assured me she had wrapped it well. Well, when it got to California, it was so damaged. It was like, I was hysterical. Once again, I called the artist and told the artist what had happened, and he said he would replace it with a similar piece if they were not satisfied with the restoration. But they were, and their insurance company. The other thing I told the client, I always tell the client is, I will not ship a work of art or have anyone ship a work of art to you unless you have had put coverage immediately on this purchase, which they did. Because the dealer refused to pay. It was a nightmare.
Also sometimes shipping, FedEx, air makes a good impression. And if you ship it by UPS ground, it makes less of a good impression. And I don't know, some of those impressions add up to make a difference.
Well, this happened to be Federal Express Air.
Oops.
So I'm always cautious, but things happen. Anything can happen.
That's true. All right. I don't know if I see more questions. If you got a question, tell me you have one. You don't have to write the whole thing out unless you want to, but go ahead.
I was just going to give my experience, because many times when I've shown my work in New York City, I live in New Jersey, my studio's in New Jersey. What I have done is I've done the packing of my pieces, my oil paintings, and then I have been successful in finding a local company, and they pick up from me, say at 8, 9 in the morning and drive in the van directly into New York. And I have the company's representative on the other line right there to take it from the van driver and, as was said, to open it up and inspect it. And this has proven to be a very good and cost-effective way for me without having to have a tremendous expense.
Good idea.
Relationships, there you go.
Yeah, relationships. That's one of the key words in this course. Patsy, I'm coming over to you. Proceed.
Thank you. I want to know if you do critiques, even if you don't consider representing that artist.
No, generally I don't. I don't
blame you. Yeah, okay, thank you. Do you have anybody you'd recommend?
You know, where are you located?
Right outside Chicago.
You know, I don't know. Paul, do you have any suggestions?
I think the best idea is to deal with, I mean, you're talking, Patsy, about, pull your camera down a little bit, Patsy, too, so I can see all, just other than...
No, I don't want you to see me.
Oh, okay. I think that, you know, I mean, there are plenty of artists in this group, and I think that sharing studio visits and cooperating with other artists... but
there are not many of us in Chicago to share with.
There's about 50.
In Chicago.
Yes.
I thought most of the people were over in the other parts of the country.
No, if you go to the Klein-Artist-Works page and you click on community,
okay.
You can see a listed by zip code, and you can figure out who's close, etc. And
right.
I see in the comment that I mean, this is something where you should reciprocate, and I think it's a decent objective for all of you to have one studio visit a week. And, you know, start off with other artists who are a little bit more gentle perhaps than a curator, but it's good practice, and it gets you conversant and able to talk about your art. And then you can, you know, share stuff with other art dealers and curators, etc. But I think, you know, doing that, Dorothy said she would do it too, so now you've got a couple of other people.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to pull this off. And there's also the Facebook page, and you can say where you are and say who wants to do it. There's a whole lot of opportunities.
Thank you.
I just want to say one thing that I'm reminded of. It's so important to take advantage of grants programs with the arts councils, the Chicago Art and Department of Cultural Affairs, the state arts councils, because, you know, sometimes even if you don't get a grant, there are people who are looking at your work. And the more eyes that look at your work, the more chances you are of somebody paying a little attention to you. You should be registered with the Chicago Artists Coalition. You should be registered with the Public Art Program and find other public art programs around the country, because you just don't know. The more your work gets seen, the better. And you should apply, you know, you should have a wall full of rejections. I mean, you know, because that means you haven't tried. I hope you have more acceptance. But if you're not trying to get your work seen or in shows or that kind of thing, this is not a moment to be retiring or shy or modest.
Cool. I think I muted Patsy. I'm sure she's saying thank you. All right. I think we've covered enough material. I appreciate this, Madeline. I think this has been really solid, good information. Let me unmute everybody so that we can have a cacophony of thank yous. Thank you very much.
Very helpful.
Well, does that mean they like me?
I think we're done.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.